She delivers meal kits in a van. Dad laughed, swirling his scotch as the senator's wife raised an eyebrow at me. The room filled with polite, pitying chuckles. I said nothing, just gripped my glass tighter. Then the music stopped. The Secretary of State was on the secure line, and he was not asking for the senator. He was asking for the delivery girl. Before I tell you how I turned my sister's engagement party into a matter of national security, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever held a secret that could destroy the people underestimating you. My name is Sasha Vance, and at 33 years old, I live two lives. In one, I am the CEO of Atlas Solutions, moving critical assets through the most dangerous war zones on Earth. In the other, I am the family failure who drives a truck. That duality was never sharper than the moment I rolled my matte black transport vehicle up to the gilded gates of my parents' summer estate in Martha's Vineyard. To the untrained eye, my vehicle looks like a bulky, ugly delivery van. In reality, it is a mobile fortress with reinforced steel plating capable of withstanding an IED blast and a communications array that rivals the Situation Room. But the security guard did not see that. He saw a service vehicle trying to crash a gathering of the black elite. He stepped out of his booth, adjusting his belt with a sneer, and held up a hand. "Delivery entrance is around the back. Service road 2 miles west," he barked, not even bothering to make eye contact. "This entrance is for guests only." I rolled down the window, the bulletproof glass humming softly. "I am a guest," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am Sasha Vance. Byron and Vivian are my parents." The guard squinted at me, then at my van, letting out a scoff that sounded like a cough. "Yeah, and I am the Prince of Zamunda. Look, lady, we have senators and doctors arriving any minute. Move this eyesore before I have it towed." Behind me, a silver Bentley honked impatiently. I checked the rearview monitor. It was Dr. Harrison, the chief of surgery at Hopkins, and his wife. The guard immediately straightened his posture, flashing a deferential smile at the luxury car while waving me away like a stray dog. The humiliation burned familiar and hot. I sat there gripping the leather-wrapped steering wheel, realizing that my 600-horsepower engine and military-grade encryption meant nothing here. In this world, value was determined by the badge on your hood, not the content of your character or the security of your cargo. I was about to explain that my net worth could buy this island, but I stopped. If they wanted a delivery girl, I would give them one. I watched the guard reach for his radio, but before he could speak, the iron gates buzzed and began to swing open slowly. My relief was short-lived, because striding down the driveway was not a welcoming committee, but my father, Dr. Byron Vance. He looked every inch the distinguished neurosurgeon in a cream-colored linen suit that probably cost more than the guard's annual salary, but his face was twisted into a familiar expression of tight-lipped fury. He did not wave or smile. Instead, he marched straight up to my driver's side window, which I had rolled down, expecting a greeting. "Sasha," he hissed, his voice low, but cutting through the humid island air. "What in God's name are you doing, driving this monstrosity here? I told you explicitly that this weekend was about elegance. Senator Sterling is arriving in less than 20 minutes, and you are blocking the entrance with something that looks like it smells of dead fish." "Dad, this is my primary transport." I started to explain, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "It is secure, and I need to be near it for work." He cut me off with a sharp wave of his manicured hand. "I do not care if it is a space shuttle. It is an eyesore. Look at it. It looks like a rolling dumpster. You are not parking this rust bucket in my driveway next to Bentleys and Aston Martins. We have an image to maintain. Sasha, an image of excellence, not manual labor. But I have equipment inside that I cannot leave unattended." I tried again, gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn my knuckles white. Byron laughed, a harsh barking sound that made the guard smirk. "You mean your boxes of dried potatoes and canned beans? Save the drama for someone who buys it." I am not having my daughter's engagement party ruined because you insist on playing delivery driver. Now move it. Where am I supposed to go? I asked, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. There is a public beach parking lot about 2 miles back down the main road, near the waste management facility. Park it there and walk back. And for heaven's sake, use the service entrance when you return. I do not want the guests seeing you dragging your luggage up the front steps like a vagrant. He turned his back on me before I could respond, signaling the guard to let the silver Bentley behind me pass. As I threw the heavy transmission into reverse, I saw Dr. Harrison wave at my father, who immediately transformed his scowl into a charming, welcoming smile. The contrast was a physical blow. I maneuvered my $10 million mobile command center carefully backwards, watching in the rearview monitor as the luxury car glided through the gates. I was being banished to a garbage dump while people whose lives I could probably buy and sell were welcomed with open arms. I grit my teeth and spun the wheel, the tires crunching on the gravel. The walk back was going to be long, hot, and humiliating, but as I drove away, I glanced at the dashboard monitor displaying an encrypted status update from the Pentagon. Let them think I was trash for now. When the time came, they would learn exactly what this fish truck could do. The walk back from the public lot was a 2-mile trudge along the shoulder of the highway under the midday sun. Dust coated my boots and sweat trickled down my back beneath my shirt, which unbeknownst to my family was lined with a thin layer of Kevlar weave. By the time I reached the main house, I looked less like a guest and more like someone who had actually walked off a construction site. The estate was buzzing with activity. Caterers in crisp black uniforms moved like a colony of ants, setting up white tents on the manicured lawn. I slipped through the massive oak front doors, hoping to make it to the guest wing unnoticed. I just needed 5 minutes to sync my comms and check the satellite feed on the hostages. Sasha. The voice stopped me cold. It was not a question. It was a summons. I turned to see my mother, Vivian, descending the grand staircase. She looked impeccable in a structured emerald dress that highlighted her role as the queen bee of the vineyard social scene. Her hair was laid to perfection and her makeup was flawless. Not a bead of sweat in sight, despite the humidity. I stepped forward ready to offer a hug, or perhaps a weary smile, but her hands were full. She was holding a ball of white fabric. Before I could speak, she tossed it at me. Reflexively, my combat training kicked in, and I snatched it out of the air before it hit my chest. It was an apron, a frilly starched white apron with lace trim. "Mom," I started, but she cut me off with a sharp click of her tongue. "Look at you, Sasha. You look like you hitched a ride on a tractor. Senator Sterling and his wife are in the solarium, and I cannot have you wandering around looking like a vagrant. Put that on. It will cover the dust." I stared at the apron in my hands. "Mom, I am here for the engagement party. I am a guest." Vivian laughed. A dry sound, devoid of any humor. "A guest. Darling, guests contribute. Ebony is securing a political alliance for this family. Brad is bringing prestige. You brought a truck. Since you insist on dressing like manual labor, you might as well make yourself useful. The caterers are short-staffed in the kitchen." My jaw tightened. "You want me to work in the kitchen? Well, it is what you do, isn't it?" She waved a hand dismissively. "You pack food. You drive boxes around. It is the same skill set." Sasha. Put things in boxes. Move boxes. Honestly, it is perfect for you. You always did prefer working with your hands over using your brain. That is why you dropped out of that master's program. Remember? Too much reading, not enough lifting. The insult was precise and practiced. She knew exactly where to strike. She reduced my logistics empire, my complex supply chains, my negotiations with warlords and generals down to packing Lunchables. I wanted to scream that I had a master's in international relations, that I had deferred my PhD to save lives, not to drive a delivery van. But that was classified. That was the life they could not know about. I am not going to peel potatoes. Mom, I said, my voice low. Vivian stepped closer, her perfume clouding my senses. You will do exactly what is needed to keep this family from looking like fools. If you cannot look the part of a Vance daughter, then you can at least serve the people who do. Now put on the apron and go find Chef Andre. He needs someone to shuck oysters. And try to keep your hands clean, Sasha. We do not want grit in the senator's food. She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing in the foyer, holding the symbol of my servitude. I looked at the apron, then at the closed door of the kitchen. My watch vibrated against my pulse. Another encrypted update. I had a war to manage, but first apparently, I had oysters to shuck. I stood there clutching the frilly white apron my mother had tossed at me like I was a coat rack. When a high-pitched squeal echoed through the foyer. "Sasha, is that you?" The voice belonged to Ebony, my younger sister, the golden child, the family masterpiece. She descended the grand staircase with the grace of a woman who had never carried anything heavier than a Chanel bag. Her hand was looped through the arm of Brad Sterling, her fiancé and the son of the senator. She looked flawless in a silk dress that probably cost more than the average American mortgage, while Brad looked every inch the politician in training with his perfect teeth and boat shoes. Ebony stopped 3 steps from the bottom and looked me up and down, her smile fading into a look of theatrical horror. "Oh my God, Sasha, what are on your feet?" She pointed a manicured finger at my boots, sturdy tactical footwear designed for desert terrain and urban extraction zones. Definitely not for a Martha's Vineyard garden party. "I walked here." "Ebony," I said, my voice flat. "Dad made me park at the public lot, 2 miles on the highway." Ebony laughed, a sound that tinkled like broken glass. "You walked. You look like you just hiked the Appalachian Trail." Brad looked at her boots. She turned to her fiancé, her eyes dancing with malicious amusement. Can you believe she was the valedictorian of her high school class? Top of her class at Spelman, too. We all thought she was going to be the next Condoleezza Rice. But no, she had to go find herself. Brad chuckled, shaking his head with a look of mock sympathy. "It is a shame, really. Potential is a terrible thing to waste. It was not a waste," I said, my grip tightening on the apron. "I built a business. Ebony, a business." Ebony scoffed, stepping off the last stair to invade my personal space. "You drive a truck, Sasha. You deliver boxes. Mom and Dad told everyone you were taking a sabbatical to study logistics because they were too ashamed to say their genius daughter dropped out of a prestigious master's program to become a glorified mailman. Do you know how hard it is for them? How hard it is for me? I am marrying into a political dynasty, and my sister looks like she changes tires for a living." I stepped back, fighting the urge to tell her that my business had cleared airspace for the president last week. Instead, I just held her gaze. "I am doing important work, Ebony. You just do not see it. Important." Ebony rolled her eyes. "You bring people groceries." "That is not important, Sasha. That is a service. You are supposed to be the diplomat, the leader. Instead, you are the family embarrassment. Now put on that apron and try to stay in the kitchen. Brad's father is bringing the Secretary of State, and the last thing we need is you stomping around in combat boots ruining the aesthetic." Brad squeezed her shoulder, giving me a condescending wink. "Do not worry, babe. Every family has a black sheep. At least she is useful, right? I mean, someone has to haul the trash out later." I watched them walk away toward the solarium, their laughter trailing behind them like exhaust. The urge to burn the house down was strong, but I had a mission. My boots might be dusty, but they were the only things in this house standing on solid ground. I stood rooted to the parquet floor, gripping the starched apron until my knuckles turned white. I thought the humiliation was over, but Brad apparently felt the performance needed an encore. He stopped halfway to the solarium and pivoted on his heel, a shark-like grin spreading across his face as he beckoned to a group of Ebony's friends who had just arrived. They were a carbon copy of him, young, wealthy, and radiating the casual cruelty of people who have never had to work for anything. Hey, Sasha! Brad called out, his voice projecting effortlessly across the high-ceiling foyer. I actually have a serious question for you. My mother has been trying to get on this keto kick for months, but she says the delivery fees are a nightmare. Since you are driving that big van around anyway, do you have any friends and family discount codes? You know, for the meal kits, maybe a promo for expired produce. The group erupted into laughter, a sharp braying sound that echoed off the marble walls. Ebony covered her mouth, giggling behind her hand, her eyes dancing with delight at my expense. I felt the heat climb up my neck. It was not embarrassment anymore. It was a cold, hard rage. I looked at Brad standing there in his boat shoes and his pastel polo shirt, thinking he was the master of the universe because his father was a senator. I wanted to destroy him right there. I wanted to tell him that my company Atlas Solutions had a higher security clearance than his father. I wanted to tell him that the van he was mocking contained a satellite uplink capable of redirecting a drone strike in real time. I opened my mouth ready to shatter their fragile little reality, ready to tell them exactly how much my net worth eclipsed their trust funds. Actually, Brad, I started taking a step forward, my voice steady and dangerous. But before I could deliver the strike that would silence the room, my wrist vibrated. It was not a text message. It was a burning, sustained pulse against my radial artery. The pattern was unmistakable. 3 short bursts, 1 long pause, 2 shorts. It was the red line. The priority alert reserved for imminent national security threats. I froze. The retort died in my throat. I glanced down discreetly at the face of my watch. The screen was black to the naked eye, but the polarized lens revealed the scrolling red text in code. Flash traffic hostage, situation sector 4. Ambassador compromised, immediate logistical support. Required Pentagon standing by. The room seemed to tilt. My world of petty insults and family drama vanished, replaced instantly by the cold calculus of crisis management. The ambassador was in Sector 4. That meant a hot extraction, likely under fire. They needed my routes, my drivers, and my satellite coverage immediately. If I stayed and fought with Brad, people would die. If I engaged in this petty ego war, the window for extraction would close. I looked up at Brad, his face still twisted in that smug, expectant sneer. He was waiting for me to snap, to cry, to prove him right about the unstable failure of a sister. Instead, I forced my muscles to relax. I swallowed the truth and choked down the pride that was screaming to be let out. No coupons, Brad, I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. We just charge standard rates. The disappointment on his face was palpable. He wanted a fight. He wanted drama. When I denied him that, he just rolled his eyes and turned back to his friends. Come on, guys, he said, dismissing me with a wave. Let us go find the good champagne. The help is boring today. They walked away, leaving me alone in the foyer. I looked down at my watch again. The message flashed once more. Acknowledge. I tapped the screen twice, confirming receipt, then turned and walked toward the kitchen. My family thought I was going to peel potatoes. In reality, I was about to go to war. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of clattering pans and shouting voices, a stark contrast to the polite clinking of champagne flutes in the foyer. The air was thick with the smell of roasting garlic and stress. Chef Andre, a man whose ego took up more space than the industrial ovens, pointed a knife at a mountain of unwashed kale. You, he barked. The mother said, you are extra hands. Get to the sink, wash and chop. Do not bruise the leaves. We are feeding senators, not livestock. I nodded, keeping my head down, and moved to the deep stainless steel basin. The water was freezing against my skin, a shock that helped ground me. Plunged my hands into the sink, scrubbing the grit from the vegetables while my mind raced through tactical scenarios, thousands of miles away. My family saw a woman who could not stick with a graduate program doing manual labor to earn her keep. The Department of Defense saw the only operator capable of navigating the logistical nightmare of a black ops extraction without triggering an international incident. I kept my left arm submerged but tilted my wrist just enough so the face of my watch was visible above the suds. To anyone watching, I was just checking the time. Checking to see how much longer I had to endure this humiliation. To me, I was monitoring a live feed of a convoy moving through a hostile desert. The screen flickered with a blue light, invisible from side angles. Sector 4 status update. Extraction team is 2 mics out from the rendezvous point. Taking heavy fire. Need confirmation on alternate route. Bravo. I bit the inside of my cheek. The alternate route required crossing a bridge that my intelligence analysts had flagged as unstable. If I gave the go-ahead, I was risking the lives of 6 Navy SEALs and the ambassador. If I delayed, they would be overrun. "Hey, new girl!" Chef Andre shouted, slamming a tray of oysters onto the counter next to me. "Less staring at your watch, more washing. The appetizers need to go out in 5 minutes." I flinched, not from fear, but from the sheer absurdity of the moment. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to throw the wet kale in his face and scream that I was currently deciding the fate of a diplomatic mission that would lead the evening news for the next week. Instead, I grabbed a knife and started chopping the rhythmic thud against the cutting board, sinking with my racing heart. "Route Bravo is a go," I whispered, barely moving my lips, the sound lost under the roar of the dishwasher. "Proceed with caution. Structural integrity is compromised, but it is the only way out." "Copy that, Atlas." Actual Route Bravo confirmed. The voice in my earpiece was calm, professional, a lifeline to the world where I mattered. Here in this kitchen, I was nobody. A server bumped into me hard, sending a spray of water onto my apron. "Watch it," he snapped, not even looking back. "You are in the way." I stepped back, apologizing instinctively, the habit of making myself small for my family kicking in even now. It was a surreal, out-of-body experience. My hands were red and raw from the cold water and rough vegetable skins. My apron was damp, my feet ached in my combat boots, and yet my mind was soaring above a canyon in the Middle East, guiding a drone to provide cover fire for my team. The contrast was dizzying. It was a test of discipline unlike any I had faced in the field. My mother breezed into the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply on the tile. "Sasha," she said, her voice dripping with disapproval, "try not to look so miserable. You are helping your sister. It is the least you can do after showing up, looking like a vagrant." She plucked a canapé from a passing tray and inspected it, critically before popping it into her mouth. "Hurry up with that kale. The guests are waiting." She did not even look at me. She looked through me, seeing only a pair of hands to do her bidding. She had no idea that the daughter she was dismissing was currently the most powerful person in the room, holding the strings of life and death while scrubbing dirt off a leaf. I watched her walk away, and a cold resolve settled in my chest. Let them treat me like a servant. Let them think I am nothing. The lower they pushed me, the less they would see coming. When I finally stood up, I scrubbed the scent of raw oysters and kale from my hands until my skin was raw and red. The guest room they had assigned me was the smallest in the house, a converted nursery at the end of the hall that still smelled faintly of baby powder. But it was private. I opened my tactical duffel bag, which was lined with a high-density polymer shield, and pulled out the dress I had brought for the welcome dinner. It was a midnight blue silk gown cut on the bias, simple but devastatingly elegant. It was not just a dress, it was a statement. It cost $4,000 and had been tailored in Milan during a secure briefing with NATO allies. For a moment, looking at myself in the mirror, I was not the family failure. I was the CEO of Atlas Solutions. I looked powerful. I looked dangerous. I stepped into the hallway, the silk swishing softly against my legs, feeling a rare moment of confidence, I barely made it 3 steps before a door slammed open further down the corridor. Vivian emerged from the master suite, adjusting a diamond earring that was large enough to have its own gravitational pull. She stopped dead when she saw me. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the dress with the precision of a laser targeting system, assessing a threat. "Where do you think you are going? Dressed like that?" she asked, her voice low and sharp. "To dinner, Mom," I said, keeping my chin up. "It is the welcome dinner." Vivian marched over, circling me like a shark inspecting a wounded seal. "This is not a red carpet event, Sasha. This is your sister's weekend. Ebony is wearing cream tonight." Cream. Do you know what midnight blue does, next to cream? It dominates. It pulls the eye. You look like you are trying to walk a runway. It is just a dress. Mom, I bought it for the occasion. It is a cry for attention. Vivian snapped, cutting the air with her hand. You disappear for years, driving that ridiculous truck pretending to be a pauper, and then you show up here trying to outshine the bride. Absolutely not. I will not have the senator's wife whispering about how the older sister is desperate to be noticed, because she has nothing else going for her. You are making a spectacle of yourself. Go take it off. I stared at her, fighting the urge to tell her that this dress was the least impressive thing I owned. You want me to change? I want you to wear something appropriate for your station, she said coldly. Put on that gray skirt suit you wore to Grandma's funeral, the one that looks like a librarian's outfit. It is modest, it is quiet, it fits you. Mom, that suit is 5 years old. It has a coffee stain on the lapel. Then pin a brooch over it. Vivian waved a hand dismissively. Just get out of that gown. You are not the star of this show, Sasha. You are barely a supporting character. Do not make me tell you again. If you walk downstairs in that dress, I will have security escort you out for causing a scene. Do not test me. She waited until I turned back toward my room before continuing down the hall, checking her reflection in a hallway mirror. I stood in the nursery, unzipping the silk with trembling hands. It was not fear shaking my fingers. It was the monumental effort of holding back a tidal wave of rage. I took off the armor of my success and pulled on the old, ill-fitting gray suit. It smelled of mothballs and defeat. I pinned a cheap brooch over the stain, just as she ordered. When I looked in the mirror, the CEO was gone. Only the failure remained. I smoothed the rough fabric and checked my watch. The extraction team had secured the package. The world was safe. But here in this house, I was still a prisoner of war. I opened the door and headed down to the dinner, ready to play my part in the farce. The ballroom was a masterpiece of exclusion disguised as elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the round tables, which were draped in linens that probably cost more than a semester of college tuition. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. I smoothed the skirt of my mothball-scented gray suit, feeling like a smudge of charcoal on a pristine white canvas. I scanned the seating chart near the entrance, searching for my name among the calligraphy. There was the head table for the parents and the senator. There was the wedding party table for Ebony and Brad and their shiny, successful friends. I looked at table 3, then 4, then 5. My name was nowhere to be found. A knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. Had they forgotten me completely? Was I supposed to eat in the kitchen with the staff? Then I saw it. Tucked away in the far corner near the swinging doors to the service pantry was a low circular table. Unlike the others, it did not have a floral centerpiece. It had a bouquet of balloons, and sitting around it were 6 children ranging in age from 5 to 7 years old, kicking their legs and throwing bread rolls. Right there next to a toddler with spaghetti sauce on his chin was a place card. Sasha Vance. I stared at it, hoping it was a mistake, a cruel joke by the wedding planner. But then my father's voice boomed across the room. "Sasha, there you are." Byron stood up from the head table holding a glass of wine, his face flushed with the satisfaction of a man who controls his universe. He pointed a manicured finger toward the corner. "We put you at table 9. It seemed more appropriate. The conversation in the room lulled. Heads turned. I stood frozen halfway between the adults and the balloons. Dad, I am 33 years old. I said, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my cheeks. I know how old you are, Sasha. Byron chuckled, and the table around him joined in a sycophantic chorus. But tonight, the adults are discussing serious matters. Senator Sterling and I are reviewing the impact of the new trade tariffs on the Asian markets. We are talking about bond yields and healthcare legislation. He took a sip of his wine, his eyes cold and hard over the rim of the glass. Frankly, dear, you would be bored. Worse, you would be lost. You drive a van, you pack boxes. What could you possibly contribute to a conversation about geopolitical strategy? You are better off over there. Help little Marcus cut his chicken. That is about your speed. The humiliation was absolute. It was not just a rejection, it was a public evisceration of my intellect. He was telling the most powerful people in the state that his eldest daughter was too stupid to sit with them. I looked at Senator Sterling, hoping for a flicker of kindness, but he just looked away, embarrassed for me. I looked at my mother, who was busy adjusting her napkin, pretending I did not exist. I walked to table 9. My combat boots felt heavy as lead. I pulled out the small chair and sat down, my knees bumping against the underside of the table. Little Marcus looked at me with wide eyes. "Are you a babysitter?" he asked. I looked at my watch, checking the encryption status of the drone feed that was currently tracking a convoy of warlords in Yemen. "No, Marcus," I whispered, picking up a plastic fork. "I am the cleaner." The toddler next to me was systematically dismantling a bread roll into a pile of crumbs, while my watch buzzed with a low-frequency pulse, confirming the drone perimeter was established over the safe house. I allowed myself a single exhale of relief, knowing the hard part was over, and we just had to wait for the cover of darkness. The ballroom was filled with the low hum of self-congratulatory conversation, broken only by the clinking of silverware. My father was holding court at the head table, laughing too loudly at everything Senator Sterling said, displaying a masterclass in sycophancy. Then the rhythm of the evening stumbled, as a flustered maitre d' whispered something in the senator's ear, causing the politician's face to darken. Like a thunderhead, Sterling slammed his hand on the table, rattling the crystal. "This is unacceptable," he announced, his voice carrying over the sudden silence. "I specifically ordered the 96 vintage for the toast. It was flown in from Bordeaux this morning. You are telling me it is sitting on the side of a highway." The room went quiet, and the maitre d' looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboard. "Sir, the delivery vehicle suffered a radiator failure 6 miles from the estate. We are trying to arrange a transfer, but on a Friday evening with the island traffic, it could be hours." "Hours," Sterling scoffed, throwing his napkin onto his plate. "We are toasting the couple in 45 minutes. What are we supposed to drink? Tap water?" My father sensed the dip in the room's energy and the threat to the evening's perfection. He stood up, smoothing his jacket, seeking a solution that would make him the hero. His eyes scanned the room, passing over the waiters, the guests, and finally landing on me in the corner. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Senator, please, there is no need for panic," Byron boomed, gesturing expansively. "We have a logistical solution right here in the room." Sasha, stand up. I froze. The toddler next to me stopped chewing, and every head turned back to table 9. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What is it, Dad?" I asked, wariness coating every word. "My daughter here drives a truck," Byron announced to the room as if presenting a party trick. "She works in delivery. In fact, she drove a large commercial van here today. Didn't you, Sasha? It is parked right down the road." He turned to the senator, his smile dripping with false modesty. "She is used to this sort of thing, hauling crates, driving heavy loads. It is her profession. She can take her van, go to the breakdown site, and transfer the cases. She will have the wine back here in 20 minutes. The senator looked at me appraisingly, looking at my cheap gray suit and my tired posture. "Is that true?" he asked. You can handle heavy lifting. It was not a question of ability, it was a question of dignity. I move sensitive assets through combat zones. I wanted to scream, I do not fetch wine for rich people who are too cheap to pay for expedited shipping. Byron did not wait for me to answer. He clapped his hands together, sealing my fate. Of course she can. Look at her, she is built for manual labor. Sasha, go get the truck. Retrieve the senator's wine, and be quick about it. We do not want to keep the future governor waiting. The command was absolute treat, the CEO of a defense contractor like a busboy. I looked at my father, seeing the smug satisfaction in his eyes. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed reducing me to a utility, a tool to be used and discarded. I looked at my watch. The operation was entering a critical phase. Leaving now was dangerous, reckless. But refusing would cause a scene that might draw too much attention to my cover. I clenched my jaw, feeling the familiar bitter taste of submission. Go get the wine, Sasha, I told myself. Just go get the wine. I looked at the senator, expecting him to intervene, but he was just checking his watch, annoyed by the delay. My father stood there, chest puffed out, waiting for me to scurry off and be the good little servant. But I could not move that truck. Inside the reinforced cargo bay was not empty space for Pinot Noir. It was a humming wall of servers keeping a localized encryption bubble over a safe house in Syria. If I opened those doors for a crate of wine, the cooling seal would break and the thermal signature would spike, alerting every hostile faction in a 50-mile radius to my team's location. I cannot use my van. Dad, I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline dumping into my system. Byron's smile faltered just a fraction. What did you say? I said, I cannot use the van. The cargo hold is sealed for transport. I have sensitive equipment inside that cannot be moved or exposed to ambient temperature. Sensitive equipment. Byron repeated the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. You deliver meal kits. Sasha, what is in there? A souffle that might fall. Are you worried about bruising some bananas? It is not food, I started, but he stepped closer, invading my personal space until I could smell the scotch on his breath. Stop lying. He hissed low enough that the senator could not hear, but loud enough for the table to catch every word. You are not worried about your precious cargo. You are jealous, you are petty, and you are jealous because for once, the spotlight is not on the genius prodigy, it is on Ebony, and you cannot stand it. You cannot stand that she is marrying a sterling, and you are sitting at the kids' table, so you are manufacturing a crisis to make this about you. I am not jealous, Dad. I am trying to prevent a disaster. You are the disaster, he roared, losing his composure entirely. The veneer of the charming host cracked, revealing the bully underneath. You are lazy, you are selfish, and you are an embarrassment to this family. I give you a simple task, manual labor, which is apparently all you are good for, and you refuse. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy key fob. It was for his pristine vintage Jaguar, the one he never let anyone drive, not even Mom. Fine, he spat. You are too good for your own truck. Take my car. But do not think this is a reward. It is a necessity, because you are too incompetent to do your own job. He threw the keys. He did not toss them gently. He hurled them hard, aimed right at my chest. I caught them by reflex, the metal biting into my palm. The room was dead silent. Even the children at my table had stopped moving, staring wide-eyed at the scene. Go get the wine, Sasha, Byron commanded, turning his back on me as if I were a dismissed servant. And if you put a single scratch on that car, do not bother. Coming back, I stood there gripping the keys, feeling the weight of his contempt pressing down on me. I looked at my watch. The extraction window was closing in 40 minutes. I had to get to a secure line, and I had to do it now. If driving his precious Jaguar was the price of escaping this room, then I would pay it. I turned and walked out, the heavy keys cutting into my hand, a reminder that to him, I would never be the driver, only the passenger in my own life. The vintage Jaguar smelled of cedar wood and my father's cologne, a sensory reminder of his overwhelming presence. Even when he was not in the car, I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the vibration of the engine as I navigated the winding coastal roads of Martha's Vineyard. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the asphalt, but I did not have time to appreciate the view. My earpiece crackled to life, bypassing the car's Bluetooth system to maintain a secure frequency. Director Vance, this is Advisor Hayes, the voice of the National Security Advisor, was tight with tension. We have a situation with the extraction corridor. The heat signature in Sector 4 has spiked. We have multiple bogies closing in on the package. I pressed the accelerator, the Jaguar surging forward as I merged onto the highway, giving me a brief moment of freedom before I had to answer. Listen to me, Hayes. I said, my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. You need to reroute the convoy to the secondary extraction point at coordinates 349er. The bridge is compromised, but the riverbed is dry this time of year. They can cross there. Negative, Director Hayes argued. The riverbed is exposed. If we move them there, they are sitting ducks for snipers. We need air support, but the president is hesitant to authorize a strike without visual confirmation. Then get him. Visual confirmation. I snapped, swerving around a tourist on a bicycle. I am authorizing the deployment of the Raptor drone from the Atlas Mobile Command Unit. Use my truck. Hayes. The uplink is live. Get the president his picture, and clear that ridge. There was a pause on the line, static filling the silence as Hayes relayed my orders. I saw the breakdown ahead. A sad-looking delivery truck with smoke pouring from its hood parked on the shoulder. The driver was leaning against the tire smoking a cigarette, looking completely unbothered by the fact that he was delaying a senator. The juxtaposition was almost hysterical. In my ear, men were fighting for their lives in a desert canyon, trying to protect a nuclear scientist. In front of me, a man was flicking ash onto his shoes, waiting for a tow truck so he could deliver Pinot Noir. I pulled the Jaguar onto the grass, keeping the engine running. Director, the drone is live. We have visual. Hayes. Voice came back breathless. We see the snipers. Good. Take them out, I ordered, popping the trunk of the Jaguar. I stepped out into the humidity, my gray suit clinging to my skin. The delivery driver looked up lazily. You the pickup, he asked, blowing smoke in my direction. Yeah, I said, grabbing the first crate of wine. It was heavy, the bottles clinking together with a fragile sound. In my ear, I heard the muted thump of a drone strike, followed by the chaotic shouts of the extraction team. Target neutralized. Hayes confirmed. The convoy is moving. We are crossing the riverbed now. I loaded the crate into the trunk, nestling it carefully against the carpeted lining. Careful with that, the driver drawled. That represents a lot of money. I looked at him, then at the horizon where the sun was dipping below the tree line. You have no idea what expensive is, I muttered, grabbing the second crate. Keep the line open. Hayes, I said, touching my earpiece. I am heading back to the circus. Do not let them die while I am pouring drinks. I hauled the heavy crates of wine through the service entrance, my arms burning from the weight, but my mind was thousands of miles away, tracking the heat signatures of my team as they moved through the darkness of the riverbed. When I pushed through the double doors into the ballroom, I expected relief, or perhaps a nod of thanks for saving the senator's toast. Instead, I found Ebony waiting for me like a spider in a silk web. She clapped her hands together, drawing the attention of the nearby waiters. Finally, she said, her voice carrying that sugar-sweet tone she used when she was being particularly venomous. The wine has arrived just in time. She gestured to the open bottles on the sideboard. Grab a decanter. Sasha, the servers are busy with the main course, so you can handle the wine service for the VIP tables. I stared at her, the adrenaline from the drone strike still humming in my blood. You want me to pour wine? I asked. Ebony laughed lightly, touching the pearls at her throat. Well, you are already dressed like the help is not that right. Besides, you know how to handle heavy lifting, Dad said, to make yourself useful. So consider this your contribution. She shoved a crystal decanter into my hand and pushed me toward a table of elderly doctors and their wives. I gripped the cold glass, fighting the urge to shatter it against the wall. In my earpiece, the static hissed a reminder that real lives were hanging in the balance, while I played sommelier for people who judged worth by the label on a bottle. I moved to the nearest table, pouring the vintage red with a steady hand, practiced not in hospitality, but in surgical precision. As I filled the glass of a woman dripping in diamonds, she peered at me over her spectacles. "You look familiar, dear," she said. "Are you one of the cousins?" I opened my mouth to answer, to tell her that I was the eldest daughter, the one who had graduated early, the one who ran a company that kept her safe at night. But Ebony materialized at my elbow, her hand clamping down on my arm. "This is Sasha, my sister," Ebony announced with a bright fake smile. "She is taking a little break from the real world right now to find herself." She leaned in conspiratorially, as if sharing a charming family secret. "She has a little startup in this gig economy. You know, meal delivery for budget-conscious families. It is very noble work delivering to the less fortunate in her van." The woman made a sympathetic noise, patting my hand as if I were a charity case. Oh, how sweet. It is good to stay humble. I felt the blood drain from my face. Budget food delivery. I managed a contract portfolio worth $3 billion. I moved assets that required presidential clearance. I fed refugees in war zones, not hipsters in apartments. But to them, I was just a failure with a van. I forced a smile that felt like a rictus of pain. "Enjoy the wine," I said. Moving to the next glass, my dignity shredding with every pour, while my sister beamed, satisfied that she had put me exactly in my place. The ballroom was stifling the air, thick with the scent of roasted duck and expensive perfume. My mother. Vivian sat at the head table, her face pale beneath her flawless makeup. She was pressing two fingers against her temple, her eyes squeezed shut against the glare of the chandeliers. I watched her from my exile at the kids' table, recognizing the signs immediately. It was not just a headache. It was the onset of a hemiplegic migraine. I had seen it in pilots after high-G maneuvers, the way the facial muscles slackened on one side before the pain truly hit. I stood up, ignoring the protests of the toddler next to me, who wanted me to open another juice box, and walked over to the head table. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice low so the senator would not hear. "You need to drink water right now, heavily salted if possible, and we need to get you into a dark room. The aura is starting. I can see your left eyelid drooping. If you do not stabilize your electrolytes, you are going to pass out within 10 minutes. Vivian opened her eyes, looking at me with a mix of confusion and irritation. "Sasha, go back to your table. I am fine. It is just the stress." "It is not stress, Mom." I insisted, my combat medic training taking over. "Look at your hands. They are trembling. You are dehydrated, and the strobe lights from the DJ booth are triggering a neurological response." Byron, who had been laughing at a joke from the senator, stopped abruptly. He turned to me, his face darkening. "Sasha, step away from your mother. What do you think you are doing? She is having a hemiplegic migraine." "Dad," I said, meeting his gaze squarely. "She needs immediate hydration and sensory deprivation, or she is going to have a seizure-like episode." It is classic presentation. Byron let out a short, incredulous laugh that drew the attention of the entire table. "Did you hear that, Senator? My daughter, the delivery driver, is now a neurologist?" He looked at me with pure disdain. "Sasha, I am the chief of neurosurgery at one of the top hospitals in the country. I think I know a headache when I see one. Your mother is tired. Stop trying to diagnose people because you read an article on WebMD during your lunch break. I did not read it on Google. Dad, I learned it in the field." I wanted to say, "I learned it stabilizing a diplomat in a bunker while mortars rained down. But I could not, so I just gritted my teeth. It is not a guess. Dad, check her pulse. It is racing. That is enough, Byron snapped. You are embarrassing yourself. You pack boxes for a living. Sasha, you drive a van. Do not presume to lecture me on medicine because you know how to put a band-aid on a paper cut. Now get out of my sight before I have security. Remove you for harassment. He turned back to Vivian, handing her a glass of champagne. Here, darling, drink this. It will help you relax. I watched my mother take the glass, her hand shaking so badly the liquid sloshed over the rim. Alcohol was a vasodilator. It was the worst possible thing she could drink right now, but she drank it anyway, because Byron said so. And Byron was the doctor. I turned and walked away. My fists clenched at my sides. I had tried to help. I had tried to use the skills that saved lives every day to save her from pain. But to them, I was just the help speaking out of turn. They would rather suffer in ignorance than accept a cure from a failure. The last taillights of the senator's motorcade faded into the darkness, leaving the estate in a silence that felt heavier than the noise. The caterers were loading the final trays into their vans, and I stood on the front porch shivering slightly in the cooling island air. My gray suit was wrinkled and my feet throbbed in my boots, but I just wanted a bed. I reached for the handle of the front door, but it was locked. I knocked softly, waiting. A moment later, the heavy oak door creaked open, just a crack revealing my mother's face. She had removed her makeup, but her expression was still as hard as diamonds. "Mom, let me in," I whispered. "I need to sleep." Vivian did not open the door further. "Oh, Sasha," she said, her voice feigning surprise. "We had a slight issue with the room allocations. Brad's cousins decided to stay the night rather than take the ferry back. We gave them the nursery." "But that was my room," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" Vivian shrugged, pulling her silk robe tighter. "Well, you have that large van, don't you? It must have plenty of room in the back with all those boxes. You are used to roughing it, camping out on your delivery routes. Just sleep there. It is only for one night, do not be dramatic." She closed the door, and I heard the deadbolt slide home with a finality that echoed in my chest. I walked back to the public lot, the gravel crunching under my boots. The fog was rolling in off the ocean, wrapping the world in gray. I reached my matte black truck sitting alone under a flickering street lamp. To the world, it was a meal delivery vehicle. To me, it was sanctuary. I placed my palm against the rear panel. The biometric scanner read my heat signature and fingerprints. A soft hydraulic hiss followed as the heavy steel doors unlocked and swung open, revealing the lie I lived every day. Inside, there were no meal kits, no vegetables, no cardboard boxes. The interior was a humming cavern of blue light and brushed steel. I stepped inside, and the doors sealed shut behind me, locking out the cold and the silence of my family. I sat in the command chair, the leather molding to my back, unlike any seat at a kid's table. The walls were lined with high-definition monitors, displaying real-time satellite feeds of the globe. On the left screen, a drone view of the Syrian border showed a convoy moving safely through the dark. On the right, a thermal map of Washington, D.C. tracked the movement of key political figures. A rack of MP5 submachine guns and tactical body armor lined the far wall, secured behind a retinal scanner. I was not a delivery driver. I was a warlord in a gray suit. I tapped the console, bringing up the encrypted comms channel. A light blinked steadily on the secure phone mounted to the desk. It was a direct line to the Situation Room, marked simply, POTUS. I checked the logs. The extraction was successful. The package was secure. I leaned back, watching the digital world spin on my screens. My parents were sleeping in their 400 thread count sheets, dreaming of social ladders and political alliances, unaware that the daughter they locked out was the only reason the world was sleeping safely tonight. I pulled a wool blanket from the emergency kit and curled up in the chair, the hum of the servers, a lullaby of power and isolation. Let them have their mansion. I had the world. The morning sun burned off the ocean fog, revealing the manicured perfection of the estate grounds. But I had not slept. The truck's internal scrubbers kept the air fresh, but my eyes felt gritty from monitoring an extraction team moving through a hostile checkpoint, somewhere in Eastern Europe. I stood in the small stainless steel bathroom of the mobile command unit and splashed cold water on my face, washing away the fatigue. Today was the engagement party. The main event. The security risks were astronomical, not just because of the senator, but because I was effectively a walking target carrying the nuclear launch. Codes in my head: I could not wear a dress. Not today, I needed armor. I opened the biometric locker and pulled out the suit. It looked like a sleek, tailored pantsuit in a deep charcoal gray. To the uninitiated, it appeared to be high-end wool, or perhaps a silk blend. In reality, it was a proprietary weave of Kevlar and spider silk developed by a defense contractor in Zurich. It was stab-proof, bullet-resistant, up to a 9mm round, and fire-retardant. It cost $55,000 a set, more than the average car, but it draped like liquid money. I pulled it on, feeling the familiar weight of the fabric reassuring against my skin. I holstered a compact sidearm at the small of my back, invisible beneath the tailored jacket, and checked my reflection. The woman staring back was not a delivery driver. She was a weapon, sheathed in silk. I exited the truck and walked across the gravel lot toward the main house. The morning air was humid, but the suit's internal thermal regulation kept me cool. Found the family on the back patio, enjoying an alfresco breakfast, catered by a team that outnumbered the guests. Ebony was holding court at the head of the table, looking radiant in a white linen sundress and oversized sunglasses. She spotted me approaching and lowered her glasses, her eyes narrowing as they swept over my outfit. She did not see the tactical advantage. She did not see the engineering marvel. She saw something else entirely. "Well, look, who finally decided to join us?" Ebony called out, her voice carrying over the sound of the ocean and the clinking of silverware. "Did you sleep in your van, Sasha? You look a little crumpled." I stopped at the edge of the patio, ignoring the stares of the bridal party. "I slept fine, Ebony," I said, my voice neutral. Ebony stood up, walking over to me with a look of mock concern. She reached out and fingered the lapel of my jacket, rubbing the material between her thumb and forefinger with a sneer. "What is this material, Sasha? It feels slippery. Is it polyester?" She laughed, looking back at her bridesmaids. "It is so shiny. It looks like one of those cheap suits security guards wear at the mall. Did you buy this at a discount outlet? I mean, I know money is tight with the meal kit business, but you could have asked Mom to lend you something decent. You look like you are wearing a plastic bag." The bridesmaids giggled, sipping their mimosas. I looked at Ebony's hand, touching the fabric that was currently stopping a high-velocity impact simulation in a lab in Nevada. She was touching technology she could not even comprehend and calling it cheap. "It is a custom blend, Ebony," I said, stepping back to dislodge her hand. "It is designed for durability." "Durability," Ebony mocked, mimicking my tone. "You are at a garden party, Sasha, not a construction site. You look ridiculous. It is so shiny and stiff. You look like you are trying to be a Secret Service agent or something. Just because you drive a truck does not mean you have to dress like you are ready to change a tire. Go. Change before the guests arrive. You are making us look bad. This is high society, not a security convention." I smoothed the jacket, feeling the outline of the ceramic plates sewn into the lining. "You have no idea. I thought I am the only reason you are safe right now." But I said nothing. I just turned and walked toward the house, letting her think she had won, knowing that if shots were fired, she would be the first one hiding behind my cheap polyester suit. I retreated to the furthest corner of the estate garden, finding a secluded teak bench beneath the cascading branches of a weeping willow. It was the only spot where the encrypted signal from my truck could handshake with my laptop without interference. I opened the tough book, its matte screen coming to life with a riot of data that would have given a Wall Street trader a migraine. To the uninitiated, it looked like chaos. To me, it was a symphony of control. The left quadrant displayed a real-time three-dimensional topographical map of the Hindu Kush Mountains complete with thermal imaging overlays of moving convoys. The right quadrant was a waterfall of financial data, rapidly scrolling numbers representing wire transfers in 6 different currencies, routing through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, to pay local contractors for fuel and safe passage. I was currently authorizing a $4 million payment to a local contact to ensure my drivers did not hit an IED on their way to the extraction point. I was so absorbed in the delicate negotiation of bribery and logistics that I did not hear the crunch of gravel until a shadow fell across my keyboard. I looked up to see Brad standing there, a mimosa in one hand and a look of bored amusement on his face. He was wearing pastel shorts that cost more than a combat rifle, and he was swaying slightly, clearly having started the celebration early. "What you doing there, Sasha?" he drawled, peering over my shoulder. "Killing zombies? Or is this one of those world-building games my nephew plays?" "Nephew. Those Minecraft, right?" I instinctively tilted the screen down, but not before he got a good look at the spinning 3D globe and the red tactical markers dotting the map. "It is work, Brad," I said, my voice tight. "Just checking on some roads." Brad laughed, a wet, sloppy sound. He leaned in closer, invading my personal space, smelling of champagne and expensive hair product. "Work. Right. You mean checking the GPS for your next taco delivery." "Come on, Sasha. You can be honest with me. It looks like a strategy game." "Is that Command and Conquer?" "I used to play that in the dorms at Yale. The graphics have really gotten insane." "Have they not? Look at those terrain details. It looks almost real." "It is real," I thought. The terrain was real. The heat signatures were real men with families. The money moving across the screen was real enough to buy his father's Senate seat twice over. But to Brad, reality was a concept filtered through a trust fund. He could not conceive of a world where his fiancée's sister was not a failure. He pointed a manicured finger at the scrolling financial data. "Look at those numbers popping up. You must be winning. Is that your score?" "You are racking up quite the high score there, Sash. Good for you. It is nice to have a fantasy life. Is it not? Somewhere you can pretend to be the boss. Somewhere you are not just the girl in the van. Keep playing. Maybe you will win the virtual war, even if you are losing at actual life." He patted me on the shoulder, a condescending tap that made my skin crawl and straightened up, adjusting his sunglasses. "Keep at it, champ. Do not let the game stress you out too much. It is not like it matters." He sauntered away, whistling a tune, leaving me sitting under the willow tree, with my $4 million transfer pending. I watched him go, marveling at the sheer density of his ignorance. He thought I was playing a game. In a way, I suppose I was. But in my game, when you lost, you did not respawn, and when you won, you did not get a high score. You got to live another day. I opened the laptop back up and hit enter, authorizing the payment. The contact was paid. The convoy was safe. I had just won the round, but Brad would never know. The garden party had swelled into a full-blown spectacle of wealth and influence. Senator Sterling was holding court near the ice sculpture, his voice booming as he introduced the crown jewel of his guest list, General Josiah King, retired. United States Marine Corps, 4 stars, and a living legend in the defense community. I knew him by a different name. To me, he was callsign Overlord, the man whose battalion I had resupplied during the siege of Kunduz when government channels had failed. He was a giant of a man, wearing a bespoke suit that could not hide the military bearing beneath. He moved through the crowd like a tank through a cornfield, shaking hands with a grip that could crush stone, and nodding politely at the vapid pleasantries of the vineyard elite. I was standing near the periphery, holding a glass of sparkling water and trying to blend into the rhododendrons. The general was laughing at something my father said. A deep rumbling sound that commanded attention. Then he turned. His gaze swept the lawn, assessing the perimeter out of habit, scanning for threats, for exits, for situational awareness. Then his eyes locked on me. The effect was instantaneous. He froze mid-laugh, his mouth snapping shut. The drink in his hand lowered slowly. His spine straightened, snapping from social ease to military rigidness in a fraction of a second. He looked at my face. Then his eyes dropped to my suit. He recognized the material. He knew exactly what a Kevlar weave looked like under sunlight. He looked back at my eyes, and I saw the flash of absolute recognition. This was not a man recognizing a friend's daughter. This was a soldier recognizing his commander. He took a step toward me, ignoring the senator who was still talking. His right hand began to rise. It was muscle memory, a reflex honed over 40 years of service. He was about to salute. He was about to snap his heels together and render honors to the CEO of Atlas Solutions, the woman who had pulled his men out of the fire when the world had turned its back. The air between us crackled with tension. To everyone else, he was just looking at a guest. To him, he was looking at the highest-ranking asset in the tri-state area. My heart hammered against my ribs. If he saluted me, the game was over. My cover would be blown and the questions would start. Questions I could not answer without violating the Espionage Act. I locked eyes with him, narrowing my gaze slightly. I gave the imperceptible shake of my head, a micro-movement that only a trained operator would catch. Stand down, soldier. Maintain cover. The general hesitated. His hand hovered near his waist, caught between duty and my silent order. Confusion warred with respect on his weathered face. He slowly lowered his hand, converting the movement into a smoothing of his tie. He nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin that carried more weight than 1,000 words of praise. He understood. I was deep cover. He would not blow it. But the look he gave me was one of profound bewilderment. He was wondering why the woman who held the keys to the kingdom was standing alone by the bushes, while lesser men drank the good wine. The general took a step forward, his mouth opening to speak, perhaps to address me as director, but he never got the chance. My mother Vivian materialized from the crowd like a heat-seeking missile locking onto a target. She had been watching from the periphery, her hawk-like eyes scanning for any imperfection in her perfect afternoon. And she had spotted the 4-star general staring at her disappointment of a daughter. She did not see a soldier recognizing a commander. She saw a social climber harassing a guest of honor, her fingers clamped around my upper arm, a vice grip of manicured nails digging into the Kevlar weave of my suit. She pulled me back hard enough to make me stumble, forcing me to break eye contact with the general. Come with me. She hissed through a smile that was plastered on for the benefit of the onlookers. She dragged me away from the VIP circle, moving with a speed that belied her heels, putting distance between me and the only person in the room who actually knew my worth. I glanced back over my shoulder. General King took a step to follow, his brow furrowed in confusion, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost being abducted. But the crowd surged around him. Senator Sterling grabbing his elbow to introduce a wealthy donor, a wall of expensive suits and cocktail dresses, cutting off his line of sight. He was swallowed by the swamp of high society, leaving me to the mercy of the shark. Vivian did not stop until we were behind a large trellis of climbing roses hidden from the main lawn. She released my arm with a shove, brushing her hands as if she had touched something dirty. "What do you think you are doing?" she whispered furiously. "Do not think I did not see that." You standing there staring him down, making eyes at General King like a desperate groupie seeking an autograph. "Have you lost your mind, Sasha? That man is a national hero," he advised the Joint Chiefs. "You deliver vegetables, Do not presume that you have the right to breathe the same air, let alone corner him by the bushes. I was not making eyes at him. Mom, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I know who he is better than you do. Vivian laughed a cruel, short sound. You know nothing about men like that. You live in a world of invoices and traffic jams. He operates in corridors of power you cannot even imagine. You are trying to network, are you not? Trying to pitch your little delivery service to the military, hoping for a catering contract? Forget it. Sasha, you are out of your depth. You are drowning, and I will not let you pull this family down with you. Stay away from the VIPs. Do not speak to the general. Do not even look at him. Go find the buffet, or better yet, go sit in your truck until the speeches are over. You are not just embarrassing yourself, you are embarrassing the family. Know your place. She smoothed her dress, took a deep breath to reset her social mask, and stepped back out onto the lawn, leaving me alone behind the roses. Knowing my place was actually sitting at the head of the table. She was so desperate to join. The party migrated into the grand salon, where a massive television screen had been unveiled behind a velvet curtain, usually reserved for displaying art. The chyron on the screen screamed breaking news in urgent red block letters. A somber news anchor was describing a developing situation in the Maghreb region of North Africa. A diplomatic envoy had been seized. The images were grainy night vision footage showing burning vehicles and masked men. The room instantly transformed into a theater of performative concern. Senator Sterling swirled his scotch, leaning in with a grave expression. This is clearly the work of the Eastern separatists, he announced, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who read a briefing paper 3 weeks ago. They are trying to leverage the trade deal. It is a classic power play. We need to show strength. We need boots on the ground immediately. My father Byron nodded sagely, swirling his own drink to match the senator. Precisely, Senator. It is about the oil pipelines in the southern sector. These rebels want control of the infrastructure. If we do not send in the Marines, now we lose the tactical advantage. It is basic geopolitics, really. Even a surgeon can see the arteries of the conflict, Brad chimed in, eager to look smart in front of his father. Yeah, it is totally the oil. Plus, I heard on a podcast that the local militia has been stockpiling weapons. They are probably holed up in the capital city waiting for a siege. It is going to be a bloodbath if we do not airstrike the palace. I stood near the doorway, my back rigid. I was looking at the screen, but I was seeing the data stream scrolling across my contact lens display. They were so wrong, it was physically painful. The envoy was not in the south. The oil pipelines were a decoy. And the group responsible was not the separatists. It was a splinter cell operating out of a mountain fortress, 300 miles north of the capital. I had 3 convoys moving through that terrain right now. I knew the temperature of the dirt. I knew the wind speed in the canyon. The news anchor continued. Reports indicate the hostages are being held in the presidential palace in the city center. That is right, Byron said, pointing at the screen. Just like I said. The palace. It is not the palace, I said. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a knife. It is the mountain compound in the Rif range, and it is not the separatists. It is the Crimson Dawn faction. They do not want oil. They want the prisoners released from the black site in Sector 7. The room went dead silent. The senator turned slowly to look at me. My father froze, his finger still pointing at the TV. Brad laughed a nervous, incredulous sound. Excuse me, Sasha, he sneered. Since when do you know anything about North African insurgency groups? Did you read that on the back of a meal kit box? I felt the blood drain from my face, realizing my mistake. I had let the CEO slip out. I had let the operator take the wheel. Now I was standing in a room full of sharks without my armor. I gripped my clutch, my heart rate spiking, not from fear of them, but from the sheer frustration of their arrogance. I realized I had to walk it back, but the truth was already hanging in the air, heavy and undeniable. Byron let out a laugh that was more of a scoff, a sharp sound of disbelief that rippled through the room. You drive a van, Sasha. You navigate traffic jams on the interstate. You do not navigate international diplomatic crises. Please stop embarrassing yourself by pretending to understand the complexities of global conflict. Leave the geopolitics to the people with the PhDs and the security clearances. He turned to the senator, offering a conspiratorial smile, as if apologizing for an unruly pet. You have to forgive her, Senator. She has always had a vivid imagination. It comes from reading too many spy novels and not enough textbooks. Stick to the meal kits. Darling, leave the heavy lifting to the men who actually run the world. The room erupted in polite tittering, a wave of soft laughter that washed over me like acid. Brad was smirking, shaking his head, as if he pitied my delusion. Ebony looked relieved that order had been restored, that her sister was back in the box, labeled failure. My mother just sighed loudly, a sound of long suffering, martyrdom. I stood there taking it all in. The condescension, the arrogance, the absolute blindness. I looked at my father, a man who could perform brain surgery but could not see that his daughter was currently orchestrating a rescue mission that would save the administration from a foreign policy disaster. He thought power was a title on a door or a degree on a wall. He did not understand that real power was silent. I did not argue. I did not try to explain that I had just spent 6 hours on a secure line with the CIA station chief in Algiers. I simply reached into my pocket, my hand closing around my phone, beneath the fabric of my Kevlar suit. I unlocked the screen by feel my thumb tracing the pattern that bypassed the standard interface and accessed the tactical command network. While my father turned back to the TV, gesturing at the map with the confidence of the ignorant, I typed a message blind. The haptic feedback buzzed against my fingertips, confirming each keystroke. Target identified. Stand by for command. I hit send. The message encrypted instantly, bouncing off a satellite and landing on a tablet in the hands of a team leader hiding in a wadi 3,000 miles away. I looked up, meeting my father's gaze with a blank expression. You are right, Dad, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I should stick to what I know. I am just the delivery girl. Byron nodded, satisfied that he had put me back in my place. Good now. Go see if the caterers need help clearing the plates. That is something you are actually qualified for. I turned and walked away, feeling the phone hum against my hip, confirming the team was in position. He thought he had won. He thought he had silenced me. He had no idea that while he was watching the news, I was making it. The transition from the informal salon to the grand ballroom was a study in choreographed opulence. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, revealing a space transformed into a palace of white roses and crystal. The string quartet segued seamlessly into a waltz, and the guests flowed into the room like a river of diamonds and silk. My sister Ebony floated in the center of it all, her hand resting possessively on Brad's arm, accepting congratulations with the gracious nod of a queen, acknowledging her subjects. My parents flanked them, Byron puffing on a cigar. He was not supposed to smoke inside, and Vivian critiquing the floral arrangements with a critical eye. It was a perfect scene, a tableau of the American dream realized by the black elite. And I was the smudge on the lens. I stood in the threshold watching them. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs, a stark contrast to the frantic pace of the data stream running through my mind. The world in this room was small. It was defined by zip codes and net worth and who you knew at the country club. The world I lived in was vast, defined by survival and supply lines, and who you knew in the Pentagon. My smartwatch pulsed against my wrist bone, a sharp, urgent vibration that signaled a priority override. I did not need to lift my arm to know what it was. The contact lens display overlaid the message across my vision, floating ghost-like over my sister's smiling face. Eagle secure at rendezvous point. POTUS requests. Final green light for extraction. T-minus 10 minutes. 10 minutes. 10 minutes until the President of the United States gave the order based on my intelligence. 10 minutes until a C-17 Globemaster dropped a payload of supplies and extraction gear onto a mountain peak in North Africa. 10 minutes until the localized jamming signal I was broadcasting from the truck outside had to be dropped to allow for the extraction comms. When that signal dropped, every phone in this room would light up with the truth. I took a breath, holding it for a second, then releasing it slowly. I adjusted the cuffs of my $50,000 suit, feeling the cool reassurance of the ceramic plates hidden within the fabric. I was not going to hide in the kitchen. I was not going to stand in the back near the service entrance. I was going to stand right in the center of the storm. I stepped into the ballroom, walking with a purpose that parted the crowd. People moved out of my way, not because they recognized me, but because kinetic energy demands space. I walked past the table where I had poured wine. I walked past the children who had asked if I was a babysitter. I walked toward the head table, where Senator Sterling was preparing to give his toast. My mother spotted me first. Her eyes widened in alarm, and she made a sharp shooing motion with her hand, mouthing the words, "Go away! Get back!" She pointed frantically toward the shadows near the kitchen doors, trying to banish the embarrassment before the cameras started flashing. I ignored her. I kept walking, my eyes fixed on the senator. Byron saw me next. He scowled, putting his cigar down in a crystal ashtray, preparing to intercept me, to dress me down one last time for ruining the aesthetic. But he was too slow. I stopped 10 feet from the head table, standing in the open space, usually reserved for dancers. I checked my watch one last time. 9 minutes. The countdown had begun. The calm was over. The storm was here. Senator Sterling tapped his crystal flute with a silver spoon, a sharp, clear sound that cut through the murmur of the ballroom, instantly commanding silence. He stood at the center of the head table, a man who had built a career on charisma and the ability to make empty promises sound like gospel. He smoothed his silk tie and beamed at the crowd, his smile practiced and perfect. The room leaned in, captivated by the aura of power that radiated from him. Beside him, my parents sat straighter than I had ever seen them. Byron looked like he had just won the lottery, and Vivian was glowing with the satisfaction of finally arriving at the pinnacle of society. "Ladies and gentlemen," the senator began, his voice rich and baritone, filling the room without the need for a microphone. "We are gathered here tonight, not just to celebrate a marriage, but to celebrate a union of legacies." He gestured expansively toward Ebony and Brad, who were holding hands and looking adoringly at each other. When my son told me he was going to marry a Vance, I told him he had excellent taste. You see, in Washington we talk a lot about alliances, about power blocks. But the most powerful alliance is one built on shared values, shared excellence, and shared history. He paused for effect, letting the words sink in. The guests nodded in agreement, sipping their champagne. This is what they came for. The affirmation that they were the chosen ones, the elite. The senator turned his gaze to my father. "Byron, you have built a dynasty in medicine, a legacy of healing and leadership. And Vivian, your philanthropic work is the heartbeat of this community. It is an honor to join our family with yours. This is a match made in heaven, a merging of political acumen and medical brilliance. It is the American dream, realized in its finest form." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, overwhelmed by the validation she had craved her entire life. My father puffed out his chest, looking around the room to ensure everyone was witnessing this moment of triumph. They were soaking it in, believing that this speech, this approval from a senator, was the ultimate measure of their worth. Sterling raised his glass higher. "Tonight, we toast to the future, to Brad and Ebony, who represent the best of us, the next generation of leadership, beautiful, intelligent, and bred for success. They are the shining example of what happens when great families come together. May your life be as distinguished as your lineage. To the happy couple here, hear the crowd chorused, raising their glasses in a glittering wave of crystal. The sound of the toast was deafening, a collective affirmation of their own superiority. I stood there watching them drink to their own reflection, feeling a cold detachment. Sterling spoke of service and duty while standing next to a man who had thrown keys at his daughter. Sterling spoke of excellence while dismissing the woman who was currently keeping his country safe. The irony was so thick I could taste it like bile. They were celebrating a fantasy, a fragile bubble of ego and perceived importance, and I was the needle waiting to pop it. I checked my watch. 8 minutes. The senator sat down looking pleased with himself, handing the floor to my father. It was Byron's turn to speak, his turn to cement his place in this hierarchy. I watched him stand up, buttoning his jacket, preparing to deliver the speech that would seal his fate. Byron took the floor with the air of a man accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award. He adjusted his silk tie and leaned into the microphone, letting the silence stretch just long enough to ensure he had every ounce of attention in the room. Senator, thank you for those kind words. He began, his voice smooth as aged brandy. You are right about legacy. Vivian and I have dedicated our lives to excellence, to raising children who understand the weight of their name. And Ebony, he turned to her, his eyes glistening with performative tears. You are the crown jewel. You followed the path we laid out with grace, graduating top of your class in pharmacy school, securing a residency that others only dream of. You are the proof that with the right guidance and the right breeding, anything is possible. You are the future of this family, and I have never been prouder to call myself your father. The room erupted in applause, polite and enthusiastic. Ebony beamed, soaking in the adoration, like a flower drinking sunlight. Byron held up a hand, quieting the crowd. He was not finished. He needed a counterpoint, a shadow to make his light shine brighter. His eyes swept the room, bypassing the dignitaries and the doctors, searching the periphery until they landed on me, standing alone in the dark space between the buffet and the service doors. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by a smirk that I knew all too well. But of course, every family has its variety, Byron said, his tone shifting to one of mock amusement. We have our doctors, we have our pharmacists, and then we have Sasha. He pointed a finger directly at me, acting as a spotlight of shame. Ladies and gentlemen, my eldest daughter is standing right back there. Do not be shy. Sasha, step out where people can see you. I did not move. I stared back at him, my face a mask of stone. He took my silence as submission, as shame. Sasha has chosen a different path. Byron continued, chuckling softly. She decided that the high-pressure world of academia and professional success was not for her. Instead, she found her passion in the culinary arts. Well, not the culinary arts exactly. More like the culinary transport arts. He paused for effect, waiting for the titters of laughter to ripple through the room. You see, folks, we usually have the caterers box up the leftovers after these events, but tonight we have a specialist in-house. If anyone wants to take a plate of roast duck home, or perhaps some of that excellent salmon, do not bother asking the waiters. Just ask Sasha. She is an expert in packaging. She spends her days putting things in cardboard boxes and driving them around in a van. So if you need a doggy bag, she is your girl. She knows exactly how to seal a container so it does not leak on your upholstery. It is a very specific skill set. But hey, someone has to do it. The laughter that followed was not polite. It was raucous, cruel, and entirely at my expense. Brad was slapping his knee, howling. The senator was smiling, tight-lipped but amused. My mother was shaking her head with a look of long-suffering patience, as if my existence was a burden she bore with saintly grace. I stood there letting the waves of mockery wash over me, Byron thought he had just delivered the ultimate put-down. He thought he had reduced me to a joke, a cautionary tale for the elite. But as I looked at him preening in the spotlight, I did not feel small. I felt like a predator watching prey graze in an open field. He was talking about leftovers. I was thinking about the encrypted uplink in my pocket that was currently synchronizing with a satellite network controlled by the National Security Agency. He called me a packaging expert. He was right. I had just packaged a high-value asset for extraction from a kill zone, and I was about to deliver a reality check that would shatter his world. I checked my watch, 7 minutes. The countdown was relentless, and Byron Vance had just used his last few minutes of relevance to make a joke about Tupperware. The laughter rolled through the ballroom like a physical wave crashing over me. It was not the warm, shared laughter of family. It was the sharp, exclusionary cackle of a tribe protecting its borders against an outsider. My father, Byron, stood on the stage, beaming, his face flushed with the triumph of having successfully humiliated his own child to entertain his guests. He looked like a king who had just ordered an execution for sport, and the crowd was eating it up. They loved the spectacle of the fall. They loved seeing someone brought low, because it made their own precarious positions on the social ladder feel that much more secure. Brad Sterling wiped a tear of mirth from his eye and leaned forward, raising his voice to be heard over the din. He was enjoying this too much, feeding off the energy of the room like a vampire. "Hey, Sasha," he called out, grinning like a jackal, "since you are the expert on leftovers, do you accept tips, or is the experience of serving your betters payment enough? Maybe we can get you a punch card? Buy 10 boxes of scraps, get the 11th one free. Do you take food stamps for your services, or is it cash only?" The room erupted again, a fresh round of guffaws that shook the crystals on the chandeliers. Ebony clinked her glass against Brad's, adoring his cruelty. My mother let out a long sigh of relief, grateful that the attention was on my failure rather than any flaw in her party planning. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I just stood there in the shadows, watching the second hand on my watch sweep past the 12. The extraction window was open. The signal jamming from my truck was down. The world was about to call, and then it happened. A sound cut through the laughter like a razor blade. It was not a standard ringtone. It was not a marimba or a chime or a pop song. It was a harsh, urgent digital trill, a dissonant frequency designed to be heard over gunfire and rotor wash. It was the red line alert, a sound that only rang on phones issued by the White House Communications Agency. A sound that meant the world had stopped turning. Senator Sterling froze mid-laugh. His hand went instantly to the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket. The smile vanished from his face as if it had been wiped away with a rag, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He knew that sound. Every high-ranking official in Washington knew that sound. It did not mean a donor was calling. It did not mean a bill was passing. It meant the president was on the line. It meant a crisis that could not wait for a briefing. It meant the world was burning. The laughter died instantly, strangled by the sudden shift in the senator's demeanor. The room went deathly quiet, the silence rushing in to fill the void left by the mockery. All eyes turned to Sterling. He pulled the secure phone out, his hands trembling slightly. The screen was flashing a single word in bold white letters against a crimson background: priority. He looked at the phone. Then he looked at the room, his eyes wide and fearful, scanning the crowd as if looking for an exit. He fumbled with the device, his fingers slipping on the sleek glass. He finally managed to hit the answer button, but in his haste and nervousness, his thumb grazed the speaker icon. The connection hissed open, amplifying the silence of the room, turning the ballroom into a waiting room for judgment. Senator Sterling held the phone as if it were a live grenade, the blood draining from his face until he looked like a wax figure melting under the heat of the stage lights. The room was silent, so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively, and pressed the answer button. His hands were shaking so violently that his thumb slipped, hitting the speaker icon instantly, amplifying the call for the entire ballroom to hear Senator Sterling. The voice on the other end was not the warm baritone of a donor or the smooth cadence of a lobbyist. It was sharp, commanding, and unmistakable. It was the voice of the United States Secretary of State, a voice usually heard announcing sanctions or declaring war. It echoed off the marble walls, bouncing around the room like a trapped bird. Mr. Secretary Sterling stammered, his voice cracking like a teenage boy. I was not expecting. "Cut the pleasantries, Senator," the secretary barked, cutting him off with the ruthlessness of a man watching a clock tick down toward Armageddon. "We have a code black situation in the Maghreb. The extraction window is collapsing, and we have lost contact with the primary uplink. We need immediate authorization to override the airspace protocols." Sterling looked around the room, his eyes wide and unseeing. He looked at my father, who was frozen with his mouth half open. He looked at Brad, who looked like he was about to be sick. "I do not understand, Mr. Secretary." Sterling whispered into the device. "I am at an engagement party I do not have access to." "I know where you are, Senator," the secretary snapped. "The intelligence report says you are at the Vance estate in Martha's Vineyard. That means you are standing in the same room as the only person on this planet who can fix this mess." Sterling blinked, confusion warring with terror. "You want to speak to Dr. Vance Byron?" He looked at my father, offering the phone like a lifeline. Byron stepped forward, straightening his tie, ready to play the hero, ready to offer his medical opinion on a military crisis. "No, you idiot! I do not want the neurosurgeon!" The secretary roared, his voice distorting slightly through the small speaker. "I want the operator. I want the person who built the network. We need you to hand this phone to Sasha Vance immediately. This is a level 1 national security priority. Do not make me ask you twice." The name hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Sasha Vance, not Ebony, not Byron, not Brad. Sasha. The delivery girl. The leftovers expert. The failure. Sterling stared at the phone as if it had just spoken in tongues. He looked at me standing in the shadows by the kitchen doors. He looked back at the phone. "There must be a mistake, Mr. Secretary," he said, his voice trembling. She is just the—" "If you finish that sentence, Senator, and tell me, she is just the help, I will have your security clearance revoked before you hang up this phone." The secretary's voice was deadly calm now, a low growl that terrified everyone in the room. "Sasha Vance is the CEO of Atlas Solutions, and she is the only reason 50 American hostages are not being executed on live television right now. Put her on the damn phone." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot or a car crash, the air sucked out of the room by the sheer magnitude of the shock. Senator Sterling looked at the phone in his hand as if it had suddenly turned into a venomous snake. He looked at me standing in the shadows, then he looked back at the phone, then at my father, his eyes wide and vacant, trying to reconcile the commanding voice of the Secretary of State with the woman standing by the kitchen door in a gray suit who had just been the punchline of a joke about leftovers. Sasha Sterling repeated the name, his voice barely a whisper, sounding like a man trying to read a map in a language he did not speak. "Mr. Secretary, surely there is a grave misunderstanding. You cannot possibly mean Sasha Vance. She is right here, but she is well. She is currently unemployed. She runs a small logistics venture, a van. She delivers food leftovers mainly. She is not involved in defense contracts. She is the sister of the bride. She is the help." The response from the speakerphone was so loud it made the crystal glasses on the nearest table vibrate. "Delivery girl." The secretary's voice exploded into the room, dripping with incredulity and rage. "Senator, are you telling me that you have the director of Atlas Solutions, the woman who architected the entire drone defense grid for the Eastern Hemisphere, standing in your living room, and you think she is delivering sandwiches?" The secretary took a breath, a harsh, ragged sound over the line that echoed through the stunned ballroom. Sasha Vance is not a delivery girl. Senator. She is the founder and CEO of Atlas Solutions. She is the largest private defense contractor in the Western world. That van you are talking about is a mobile tactical command unit worth $40 million. And right now, she is the only person with the encryption keys to save 50 American hostages who are currently being held at gunpoint in a compound that she identified 3 hours ago, while you were busy drinking champagne and making jokes. Gasps rippled through the room like a sudden wind. My father, Byron, staggered back a step, clutching the back of a chair to steady himself. His face went from flushed to an ashen gray, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Ebony dropped her champagne glass, shattered on the marble floor, a sharp, explosive sound, but no one looked down. No one looked at the bride. They were all looking at me. They were looking at the failure, the disappointment, the leftovers expert, and seeing a stranger they had never met. Atlas Solutions. Someone whispered near the front, their voice trembling. That is the company that built the Iron Dome upgrade. That stock is trading at $500 a share. She is worth billions, another voice murmured in shock. The secretary's voice cut through the murmurs like a whip crack. Senator, we are burning daylight. Every second you stand there confused is a second closer to those hostages being executed. Hand the phone to Director Vance. Now, or I will send a team to arrest you for obstruction of justice. Sterling moved. He did not walk. He practically ran toward me, stumbling over his own feet in his haste. He held the phone out with both hands, like an offering to an angry god. His arrogance was gone, vaporized by the searing heat of the truth. He looked at me with terror and awe, his hands shaking so hard the phone rattled. "It is for you!" he squeaked, his voice breaking like a child's. Director Vance. The silence that descended upon the ballroom was not merely an absence of noise, it was a physical weight pressing down on every chest in the room. Senator Sterling descended from the dais, his movements stiff and jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings. His face, which only moments ago had been flushed with the arrogance of his toast, was now drained of all color, leaving him looking sickly and waxen. He navigated the crowded room, moving through the sea of guests who parted for him instinctively, recoiling from the radioactive aura of his panic. The air conditioning system hummed in the background, a low drone that sounded like a countdown to the end of the world. I stood my ground by the swinging kitchen doors. I did not step forward to meet him. I did not offer him an easy out. In my left hand I was still clutching a crumpled linen napkin, a prop I had used to wipe a smudge from a serving tray just seconds before the phone rang. It was a dirty rag stained with wine and grease, the symbol of the station they had assigned to me. I held it loosely, letting it dangle. A stark contrast to the billions of dollars of influence approaching me in the form of a terrified senator. The guests watched the tableau unfold with morbid fascination, eyes darting from the powerful man in the tuxedo to the woman in the gray suit holding a rag. Sterling stopped 2 feet in front of me. He was sweating, beads of perspiration gathering on his upper lip, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. He looked at the napkin in my hand, then up at my face, searching for any sign of the girl he had mocked just moments ago. He found nothing. My face was a mask of cold professional indifference. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the silence. Director Vance. He whispered, his voice trembling so much the words barely formed. He held the phone out to me, with both hands offering it up like a penitent offering a sacrifice to an angry deity. "It is for you, the Secretary of State. He says it is urgent." I looked at the phone, seeing the red status bar pulsing on the screen. Then I looked at the dirty napkin in my hand. The entire room held its breath, waiting to see what I would do. Perfectly still, as if trapped in amber, I let my fingers relax. The napkin slipped from my grasp, falling through the air in slow motion. It hit the marble floor with a soft final thud, lying there like a discarded skin. I reached out and took the phone from the senators, shaking hands. My grip was steady, my movements precise. I did not look at my father, whose face was a mask of horror and confusion. I did not look at Ebony, who was clutching her pearls as if they could protect her from the reality shifting beneath her feet. I looked only at the senator, dismissing him from my world with a single glance. "Thank you, Senator," I said, my voice cool and commanding. "You can return to your seat now. The adults are talking." I lifted the phone to my ear, turning my back on the room, on the party, on the entire farce of a life they thought was important. I tapped the encryption key on the screen, securing the line. "Mr. Secretary, this is Atlas Actual," I said, my voice shifting instantly into command cadence. "I have the package on screen, confirming authorization for the strike override code. Alpha Sierra 9. The room behind me gasped a collective intake of breath as the delivery girl vanished and the director took the stage. I accepted the phone from Senator Sterling, but I did not look at him. He was already fading from my reality, becoming nothing more than background noise, a piece of furniture in a room that no longer mattered. I turned my back on him, and on the entire assembly of stunned guests, creating a private perimeter of command amidst the chaos of the ballroom. The phone felt cool and heavy in my hand, a physical link to the world where I was a titan. I brought it to my ear and my posture shifted instinctively. My shoulders squared, my spine locked, and my chin lifted. The submissive sister, the delivery girl, the disappointment, all of them vanished. In their place stood the director. "Vance here," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a diamond cutter on glass. It was not a question. It was a declaration of presence. "Secure this line immediately. Initiate handshake sequence with the Atlas servers." I waited a fraction of a second for the encryption tone to chirp in my ear, signaling that the line was now shielded from every intelligence agency on the planet, except mine. "Mr. Secretary, I have the live feed from the drone array. The target compound is confirmed. Hostiles are fortifying the north wall, but they have left the drainage culvert exposed, just as my analysts predicted." I paused, listening to the frantic voice of the Secretary of State on the other end. He was asking about timelines, about casualty probabilities, asking the questions of a man who was used to politics. "Not war," I cut him off, my tone devoid of patience. "Save the debate for the press briefing, Mr. Secretary. We are past the point of negotiation. You called me because you ran out of options. You called me because my technology is the only thing fast enough to beat the execution clock. So listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to say this once." I looked out the window toward the dark driveway, where my black truck sat, waiting like a sleeping beast. I could feel the connection to it, the invisible digital tether that bound me to its systems. "I am activating Alpha Protocol. Effectively. Immediately." I said the words, landing with the weight of a gavel strike. "Authorization code. Victor. Echo 49. Initiate the uplink from the mobile command unit. I am pushing the full tactical data packet to the satellite network. Now, you will have control of the birds in 30 seconds. I tapped the face of my watch, authorizing the transfer. The truck outside would be coming alive, its servers ramping up to full power, sending a beam of encrypted data straight into the ionosphere to redirect a constellation of satellites toward North Africa. "Do not interrupt me," I snapped. Though the secretary had not spoken. "The data is heavy. It includes thermal mapping, structural schematics, and the real-time biometric heart rates of the hostages. My algorithms have already calculated the breach point, sending the coordinates to the SEAL team commander. Now tell the president he has his window. It is tight. It is dangerous. But it is open." I lowered the phone slightly, addressing the room without turning around, knowing they were hanging on every syllable, every cryptic command. "Upload complete," I said into the phone, my voice flat and deadly. "The assets are yours, Mr. Secretary. Do not miss." The vibrations started deep in the floorboards, a low-frequency rumble that rattled the fine china on the tables and sent tremors through the soles of every expensive shoe in the room. It was not an earthquake. It was the sound of a beast waking up directly outside the French doors. The guests turned in unison, drawn by the mechanical groan of hydraulics engaging. The view through the glass was usually a serene vista of the driveway and the manicured hedges beyond. But tonight it became a stage for a technological metamorphosis. The rusty white delivery van, the one my father had mocked just minutes ago as a vessel for leftovers, began to shed its skin like a serpent, molting and fast forward. The faded vinyl decals reading Sunnyside Meal Delivery split down the middle and retracted with a sharp pneumatic hiss, revealing the vehicle was not made of dented sheet metal, but of high-grade matte black composite armor. The chassis seemed to expand, rising on a heavy-duty suspension system that locked into place with a metallic thud capable of stabilizing the vehicle against the recoil of a mortar strike. The roof of the van split open, and a complex phased array satellite antenna rose from the interior, unfolding its petals like a mechanical flower searching for the sun. It spun rapidly, locking onto the signal from the geostationary orbit overhead, establishing the high-bandwidth link I had commanded. A soft sapphire light began to pulse from the side of the truck, illuminating the darkness. As the final camouflage panels slid away, the logo of my company was revealed, glowing with a steady, authoritative hum. It was not a picture of a vegetable. It was the stylized Titan holding up the world, the emblem of Atlas Solutions. The words, Director Access, only scrolled across a digital display on the rear hatch, confirming that the command center was fully operational. But the transformation was not limited to the machine. The two drivers who had been leaning against the tires smoking cigarettes and looking bored underwent a change just as drastic. They did not look at the truck in surprise. They looked at their watches, synchronizing with the upload. In a fluid, synchronized motion, they ripped the Velcro tabs of their stained gray coveralls, pulling the fabric apart to reveal the tactical gear underneath. The illusion of the lazy delivery men dissolved instantly, replaced by the terrifying reality of Tier 1 operators. They tossed the coveralls onto the gravel, revealing black tactical vests laden with magazines, flashbangs, and ceramic plating. They reached into the hidden compartments of the trucks, wheel wells, and withdrew short-barreled carbines, their movements precise and practiced. The lethargy was gone, replaced by the coil spring tension of predators entering a kill zone. They moved toward the ballroom doors, not with a run, but with a rapid tactical glide, covering each other's blind spots, communicating without words. The double doors of the ballroom burst open, not with a bang, but with the force of absolute authority. The guests screamed, scrambling back, knocking over chairs, and spilling drinks in their panic. The two operators ignored them completely. They swept the room with the barrels of their rifles, their eyes scanning for threats behind polarized combat glasses. They moved through the crowd like sharks parting a school of fish until they flanked me, one on the left, one on the right, creating a human wall of Kevlar and steel between me and my family. The lead operator, the one who had earlier asked for a light from the valet, leaned in close, his voice amplified by the sudden silence of the room. Package is secure. Director, the uplink is stable and the perimeter is locked. We are ready for your command. Byron was the first to recover from the paralysis that had gripped the room. His survival instinct was a powerful thing, honed by years of navigating hospital politics and social climbing. He saw the shift in the atmosphere. He saw the way the Secretary of State commanded respect, and he saw the heavily armed men flanking his daughter realize that the power dynamic had inverted completely. He took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture, a nervous, oily smile attempting to plaster itself onto his face. The arrogance that had defined him all evening was gone, replaced by a desperate attempt to rewrite the narrative in real time, Sasha. He stammered, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to inject warmth into a tone that had only ever held contempt for me. I knew it. I always told your mother you were destined for great things. This whole delivery driver charade. I knew it was just a cover. You are so clever, sweetheart. We were just playing along, right? It was our little inside joke. I am so proud of you. I knew you were doing something important. I did not let him finish. I did not even blink. The operator to my right shifted his weight, the ceramic plates in his vest clicking softly, a subtle threat that froze my father in his tracks. "Stop talking, Byron," I said, my voice slicing through his lies like a scalpel. "You did not know anything. You spent the last 4 hours in the last 10 years telling anyone who would listen that I was a failure. You mocked my clothes, you mocked my job, you used me as a punchline to entertain your guests, to make yourself feel big. Do not try to rewrite history now, just because you realized you are the smallest person in the room." He opened his mouth to protest, to offer some weak defense. But I cut him off again, my voice rising just enough to carry to the corners of the silent ballroom. "You just humiliated yourself in front of the Secretary of State?" I continued, my gaze boring into him. "You treated a Tier 1 national security asset like a servant, simply because you are too shallow to look past a uniform. Do you have any idea how that looks? The entire intelligence community is listening to this line right now. You are not a proud father, Byron. You are a security risk, and you are about to become the biggest joke in Washington." Vivian saw her husband crumbling under the weight of the truth and decided to try a different tactic. She lunged forward, tears streaming down her face that seemed to appear on command. "Sasha, my baby!" she wailed, reaching out with her manicured hands attempting to grab my arm to pull me into an embrace that would look good for the cameras. She wanted to be seen touching the director. She wanted to reclaim her ownership of the daughter she had tried to hide behind a trellis just 20 minutes ago. She wanted to be the mother of the billionaire CEO, not the mother of the failure. She never touched me. The operator on my left moved with a speed that the eye could barely track. He stepped in front of me, his arm coming up like a steel bar blocking her path. He did not push her, he simply occupied the space where she wanted to be, making it physically impossible for her to reach me. "Step back, ma'am," he ordered, his voice flat and uncompromising. "Maintain a 5-foot distance from the director at all times." Vivian recoiled as if she had been slapped. She looked at the guard, then at me, her eyes wide with disbelief and indignation. "Sasha, tell him to move," she gasped, clutching her chest. "I am your mother. I am just trying to hug you." I looked at her, seeing a stranger, a woman who only loved what she could control and what she could show off. I shook my head slowly, my expression unmoved. "No, Mom," I said quietly. "You lost that privilege when you told me to sleep in the van." Senator Sterling turned away from me, his face a map of pure, unadulterated panic. He needed a target. He needed somewhere to displace the terror of the last 5 minutes, and the realization that his political career was hanging by a thread. He looked at his son Brad, who was standing near the cake table, looking confused and terrified, holding a half-empty glass of champagne. Brad offered a weak smile, trying to find some camaraderie with his father, trying to act like this was just a bump in the road. The sound of the slap was louder than the gunshot of a starting pistol. It cracked through the ballroom, echoing off the high ceilings and silencing the few whispers that had started to rise. Senator Sterling had put his entire body weight into the blow, connecting his palm with Brad's cheek with a force that spun the younger man around. Brad stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the table, knocking over a tower of crystal flutes that shattered with a musical crash that sounded like a funeral bell. "You imbecile!" Sterling screamed, his voice shredding with rage. He did not care about the cameras anymore. He did not care about the donors. He only cared about the fact that he had just insulted one of the most powerful women in the hemisphere because his son was too stupid to do a background check. "You told me she was a shipper. You told me she delivered meal kits. You let me stand up there and make a fool of myself in front of the Secretary of State." Brad clutched his face, his cheek already turning a bright, angry red. "Dad, I thought she was," he stammered, tears welling in his eyes. "I did not know." "You did not know," Sterling roared, stepping into his son's personal space, forcing Brad to shrink back like a beaten dog. It is your job to know. You are my campaign manager. You are supposed to vet the people we associate with. You almost cost me my seat, Brad. Do you understand that? The Secretary of State just threatened to revoke my clearance because I listened to you, because I trusted your judgment over reality. You looked at a CEO and saw a servant, because you are too arrogant to see past your own nose. The senator turned his glare toward my parents, who were huddled together watching their social standing evaporate in real time. He looked at them with a disgust so profound it looked like he smelled something rotting. "I cannot believe I almost let my family merge with yours," Sterling spat, pointing a trembling finger at Byron. "You are a family of fools. You have a titan of industry living under your roof and you treat her like the help. You are not just blind, you are a liability." Sterling straightened his jacket, his breathing heavy and ragged. "The wedding is off," he announced, his voice cold and final. "There will be no union between the Sterlings and the Vances. I will not have my bloodline tainted by such profound ignorance. Take your ring back, Brad. We are leaving." Ebony let out a strangled sob, creating a sound of pure heartbreak. She reached out toward Brad, her perfect engagement party dissolving into a nightmare. Brad did not even look at her. He was too busy cowering before his father, too busy nursing his bruised ego to care about the woman he had promised to marry just hours ago. Sterling looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with fear and respect. "I am so sorry, Director Vance. We will be going now. Please tell the secretary we are leaving." He grabbed Brad by the collar of his tuxedo and dragged him toward the exit, leaving Ebony crying amidst the shattered glass and the ruins of her perfect day. I watched them go, feeling nothing but a cold sense of justice. The trash was taking itself out. The heavy double doors swung shut behind the retreating backs of the Sterlings, sealing the ballroom in a suffocating silence that felt heavier than the deepest ocean trench. The echo of the senator's final decree hung in the air, a guillotine blade that had severed the ties between two dynasties. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The guests stood frozen amidst the spilled champagne and shattered crystal, looking like statues in a museum of disaster. Then the spell broke, not with a whimper, but with a shriek that tore through the room like tearing metal. Ebony collapsed to her knees in the center of the dance floor, her white dress billowing out around her like a wilting flower. She was not crying from heartbreak. She was crying from the sheer catastrophic loss of status. She looked at the empty space where her fiancé had stood. Then she turned her gaze toward me. Her face, usually a mask of composed perfection, was twisted into a rictus of pure hatred. Her mascara was running in dark streaks down her cheeks, making her look like a tragic clown in a horror movie. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the hand of a bridesmaid who tried to help her, and stormed toward me, her finger pointed like a dagger. "You did this!" she screamed, her voice shrill and breaking. "You did this on purpose. You ruined everything, Sasha. You could not stand it, could you? You could not stand to see me happy. You could not stand that I was the one winning that. I was the one getting the senator's son and the perfect life. So you had to blow it all up. You jealous, spiteful little witch." She lunged at me, but the operator on my right stepped forward, barely shifting his weight, ready to intercept her. I held up a hand signaling him to stand down. I did not need protection from Ebony. Her words had lost the power to hurt me years ago. "You planned this," she spat, stopping just out of striking range, her chest heaving heavily. "You waited. You waited until the toast. You waited until the most important moment of my life to pull out your phone and play the big shot. CEO. Why did you not tell us? Why did you let us think you were nothing? You wanted to humiliate us. You wanted to steal my spotlight." I looked at her, calmly seeing the toddler who used to steal my toys, seeing the teenager who used to mock my grades, and now seeing the woman who blamed the world for her own gravity. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. My silence was louder than her screaming. "I did not ruin your wedding, Ebony," I said, my voice cool and detached. "I did not make Brad a fool. I did not make Dad a bully. And I certainly did not make the senator a coward. I saved 50 lives today while you were worried about the font on the place cards. Ebony shook her head frantically, refusing to hear it, ripping the veil from her hair and throwing it on the floor. "It is all your fault," she shrieked. "You are a liar. You deceived us. You let us treat you like that. I deceived you," I asked, stepping closer, my shadow falling over her. "No, Ebony. You deceived yourselves. You looked at a gray suit and saw a servant, because that is what you wanted to see. You needed me to be small, so you could feel big. You needed me to be a failure so you could be the you. Success. You built this entire event, this entire relationship on the foundation that you were better than everyone else." I gestured to the room, to the stunned guests who were watching the implosion of the Vance family with morbid fascination. "I did not destroy your happiness, Ebony," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The lies and the arrogance of this family destroyed it. You thought you could build a castle on a swamp of ego, and you are surprised it sank. The truth did not break your wedding, the weight of your own vanity crushed it." Ebony stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, unable to find a retort that could penetrate the armor of my reality. She looked around the room, seeking an ally, seeking someone to tell her she was right, but even our parents looked away, ashamed and defeated. I turned my back on her, leaving her standing alone in the wreckage of her perfect day, sobbing over a marriage that was never real to begin with. The silence in the ballroom was shattered not by words, but by a rhythmic thumping that vibrated in the chest. It started low and grew rapidly into a deafening roar that shook the window panes. The guests looked to the ceiling in confusion, but I looked to the lawn, knowing exactly what was coming. From the darkening sky, a black shape descended like a predatory bird. It was not a news chopper or a tourist transport. It was a Sikorsky S-76 customized for executive extraction, bearing the Atlas insignia in matte gray on the fuselage. The navigation lights blinked a steady rhythm, cutting through the twilight as the pilot maneuvered the massive machine toward the manicured south lawn. As the bird flared for landing, the rotor wash hit the garden party setup like a hurricane. The carefully arranged silk tents whipped violently, snapping their tethers and collapsing in a heap of expensive fabric. The force of the wind caught the linen tablecloths, sending silver platters and crystal glasses tumbling across the grass. The centerpiece of the event, the 5-tier fondant wedding cake that had cost more than my first car, wobbled precariously for a second before toppling over. It smashed into the ground in a spray of white sugar and sponge, a perfect metaphor for the ruin of the day. I did not flinch at the noise. To me, the sound of rotor blades was the sound of safety. It was the sound of a mission accomplished. The operators flanking me moved to the doors, kicking them open with authority. The wind rushed into the ballroom, blowing debris and napkins into the faces of the stunned guests, forcing them to shield their eyes. I stepped out into the gale. The wind whipped my hair back, but I walked with the steady gait of a woman who walks into headwinds for a living. I did not run. I did not hurry. I walked across the grass, my heels sinking slightly into the turf, moving toward the open door of the helicopter where a crew chief waited. I could hear my mother screaming over the noise of the engines trying to save the decorations, but her voice was lost in the roar. My father stood clutching a pillar, his hair blown wild, his dignity stripped away by the sheer horsepower of my reality. Ebony was huddled on the floor, shielding her face from the flying petals of her ruined flower arrangements, trying to hold down her dress. They looked small. They looked insignificant. They looked like people who had spent their whole lives building a house of cards, only to be surprised when the wind finally blew. I reached the aircraft, and the crew chief leaned out, extending a gloved hand. I took it, hauling myself up into the leather interior of the cabin. The smell of aviation fuel and leather filled my senses, a perfume of power that replaced the scent of stale champagne. I sat down and buckled the 4-point harness, clicking the lock into place. The two operators jumped in behind me, sliding the heavy door shut and sealing out the noise and the chaos of the estate. The pilot looked back, giving me a thumbs up. "We are wheels up. Director Destination Washington ETA 40, 5 minutes." I nodded, leaning my head back against the headrest. "Take us home," I said softly, as the helicopter lifted off, pulling away from the gravity of the island. I did not look out the window. I did not look down at the tiny figures running around in the chaos I had left behind. I did not check to see if my parents were watching, or if my sister was crying. I fixed my eyes forward on the horizon, where the sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in colors of fire and gold. I was not running away. I was ascending, and for the first time in my life, I was flying free. The air in the Roosevelt room was always cool, and smelled faintly of lemon polish and old leather. It was a scent I had grown accustomed to over the last 3 months, as familiar to me now as the smell of hydraulic fluid used to be. I sat at the center of the long mahogany table flanked by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of the Treasury. On the wall, monitors the satellite feeds of the reconstruction efforts in North Africa showed trucks moving tons of medical supplies into the region. The Crimson Dawn faction had been dismantled, and the region was stabilizing, thanks largely to the logistical network Atlas Solutions had implemented. General King, who had once almost saluted me in a garden, now sat to my right, listening intently as I outlined the Phase 2 infrastructure plan. The dynamic in the room was absolute. I spoke, and the most powerful men in the world took notes. "Director Vance?" my assistant whispered, leaning in close to my ear. He was a young, efficient man named Leo who carried a tablet like it was a holy relic. "I have that personal update you requested on the assets in Massachusetts." I paused, mid-sentence, holding up a hand to pause. "The general." Leo slid the tablet across the polished wood surface. The screen displayed a news feed from a local Boston affiliate. The headline was stark and unyielding. "Vance, estate seized in bank foreclosure auction. Scheduled for Friday." Below the headline was a photo of the mansion, the place where I had been told to sleep in a van, now surrounded by chain-link fencing and bank seizure notices. The windows were dark. The manicured lawns where the wedding tent had collapsed were overgrown. I scrolled down. The article mentioned a cascade of financial ruin. Senator Sterling had not just canceled the wedding, he had launched a scorched earth campaign investigating my father's medical practice for insurance fraud and my mother's charity for embezzlement. The power of a scorned politician was a terrifying thing, and he had dismantled their legacy. Brick by brick. There was a video embedded at the bottom of the page. It was a live stream replay from Ebony. She appeared to be sitting in a cramped beige room, perhaps a motel, illuminated by the harsh light of a cheap ring light. Her hair was messy and she was crying, speaking into the camera with a desperate, pleading tone. "We are the victims here," she sobbed, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "My sister, she abandoned us. She has billions, and she won't even help her own family. We are living out of suitcases. Please donate to the link below if you have a heart." I looked at the view count. It was abysmal. The comments scrolling by were not sympathetic. They were ruthless, people mocking her fall from grace, posting clown emojis and telling her to get a job. I watched for another 3 seconds, feeling a strange sense of hollowness. It was not joy. It was not anger. It was just the total absence of weight. The monsters who had haunted my life were not monsters at all. They were just small, sad people who had run out of other people to use. "Is there any response?" Director Leo asked, his finger hovering over the screen. "Do you want us to issue a statement or perhaps intervene with the bank?" I looked at Ebony's tear-stained face one last time. Then I reached out and swiped the screen, closing the window and extinguishing her voice. The silence that followed was peaceful. "No. Leo." I said, my voice steady. "I have no comment. Let the bank take it." I pushed the tablet away and pulled the heavy binder of the Humanitarian Aid Act toward me. I uncapped my fountain pen, the nib scratching smoothly against the thick paper as I signed my name, authorizing $1 billion in food and water for a country halfway across the world. I looked up, meeting General King's eyes. Where were we, General? Yes, the supply lines. Let us get back to work. We have a world to save, and I do not have time for the past. The most profound lesson from Sasha's story is that true power does not need to announce itself with loud speeches or flashy clothes. Real substance is often quiet, found in the people who are doing the hard work, while others are busy seeking applause. The Vance family and the Sterlings were so blinded by their own obsession with status and appearance that they failed to recognize the greatness standing right in front of them. They mistook silence for weakness and humility for failure. It teaches us to look deeper than the surface because the person you dismiss today might be the only one capable of saving you tomorrow. It is a reminder that dignity comes from what you build and who you help, not from the title you hold or the brand you wear. In a world full of noise, be a Sasha. Focus on the mission, not the audience, and let your results scream so you never have to raise your voice, because in the end, the truth always wins and arrogance always falls. If you enjoyed this story of justice and hidden power, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode of the drama.